Okay.
All right, welcome to Lunchtime Live with Colton and Brandon. So I was here early today. I got in and Colton walked around the corner. Lo and behold, we both had the same shirt on. That was not planned. We should have planned it. Now that we can see it, we should have planned this a long time ago.
Got our webinar shirts on.
Yeah, we're in our shirts. So as you know from previous Lunchtime Lives, I'm over the sales team here at Zibtek. Colton is over technology, so he's kind of here to keep me in line with my ADHD, and he's going to help me stay on track. We've actually, if you've followed any of our webinars, you know that we've done kind of the summer of Web3. So that consisted of everything from NFTs and prompting and AI and all kinds of good stuff. So you could go back and check those out. Not saying that it's accurate today as it was then, because everything's changing. Today, we're actually going to do comparing staff augmentation and software development outsourcing. So this is pretty exciting because this consists of our business and what we do and how we operate. So we have a little bit of knowledge about that, and we can share that with you. So staff augmentation versus outsourcing. What are the differences? If you look at staff augmentation, and these are basically two different ways of hiring talent, right? So if you look at the talent acquisition, like recruiting or staffing, also versus a business model, how we operate within those confines. So if we look at staff augmentation, this is taking your existing team and adding someone to it. So if you already have a software team or any other teams, you can add through that staff augmentation. Outsourcing is basically going to a company such as Zibtek, although we offer both, and they handle the entire project for you. So one you're involved in, the other you basically hand off that project. Each has its pros and cons, and especially depending on what kind of project or your capabilities, your knowledge of the technology and so forth. There's a lot of different things, like you could have different goals or your budgets. Depending on budgets, timelines, and preferences will determine which of those you want to look at or which one of those you want to use. So here we'd like to outline kind of a few differences between them. And we'll go through control, which one has control and all that, the cost of each one, the flexibility, and the quality. So kind of hitting on those 4 points. And then just kind of wanted to open it up. If we do have any questions, you can add a question to the chat, or you can speak up. But at this point, we'll just kind of take it from here and kind of pass it back and forth. So if we look at control and start with staff augmentation, this is actually having control over the selection. So starting from the very first of it, which is interviews. So you could actually get involved with staff augmentation in hiring the person that you want. You can also, once you've hired that person, you'll have more control over what tasks are assigned to them. So if it's technology, you're getting into scrums and user stories and tickets, you're going to have a lot more. You're going to actually be involved in a lot of that stuff. Also with performance evaluation, so how a person is performing, what they're doing, are they meeting your standards? So a lot of that stuff with staff augmentation, you have a lot of control over. And then if you look at outsourcing, for example, this is basically delegating the entire project. So not that you lose full control, because we don't want to give off that impression, but you're basically allowing that company to manage that project from start to finish. And so the one thing that could be an issue is if maybe your standards are different than their standards, or the way that you work is not congruent with yours. So you want to take those things into consideration. And then also one big benefit is freeing up your internal resources. And we push on this a lot in sales, which is, get back to doing what you do best, right? Your value propositions. So if you free up your time by, sending that project away, then we, for example, Zibtek handles that, you're freeing up your internal resources.
Yeah, definitely. I think with control, when we're talking about these different kind of aspects, like you talked about, right? Control, cost, all those things. Control, I would say, favors staff augmentation if your company or your infrastructure handles it, right? Like I think we were talking the other day, and we made the analogy of staff augmentation versus outsourcing. It's almost like buying a car versus leasing a car. Buying a car, has its pros and cons versus leasing a vehicle. Has its pros and cons, right? Like maybe you or even renting a car, right? Maybe that's even more short term.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you are in town somewhere for maybe you're on contract work or you're doing something like that. You need a vehicle for a week or a month or something like that. You really just need something to get you from point A to point B. You need to get it done. It's nice to just grab that vehicle, have it for a while, and then get rid of it. And that's when it's kind of helpful for outsourcing. Now, if you need something for a more long-term engagement, or maybe you have very dynamic needs that are going to be changing over, course over a period of time, just owning that vehicle is really helpful. Whereas that's kind of more like staff augmentation, right? It's yours. You can customize it, right? You can go, maybe put a lift and tires on it if you want to use it for off-roading. And then maybe when, the summer comes, you want to just put it on the road, you can just go swap out the tires for it. You have that full control over it. And if you know what you're doing, right, if you're a mechanic or kind of a gearhead, you have the capability of managing and taking care of that vehicle. It's kind of the same thing with staff augmentation of control. If you already have a development team, or even if you just have a product owner, you have some means of managing like a development team, the staff augmentation is going to go along a lot better for you, because you have the means within your team to manage. And it's not always development team, right? Like when we talk about this, we're in our world where we mostly deal with like software developers or scrum masters or product owners, those types of things. But right, you can outsource anything, right? It can be marketing, sales, SEO, it can be accounting, it can be so many different things. And so really that's, when we talk about specifically to control, I think that's one of the points that's really important to understand. If you're an organization that has the means to manage those resources, and it's going to be a long-term resource, it makes total sense to go more the staff augmentation model. It's going to be cheaper. You're going to have way more control, and it really gives you that flexibility, right, to handle those resources as needed, and again, more control. You can control exactly how they're going to spend each day, each hour, if need be. Whereas outsource, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, where maybe they're going to move people around, swap things out. You're going to have a lot less control. But if you don't have the means to properly, manage or reward or control, maybe like a technical resource like a developer, if you don't have anyone in your organization that can properly understand like what a developer needs to do every day and manage their performance and all of those things, then maybe you want to give up some of that control to an outsourced team, and that helps, right? And that's a pro and con. That's really just going to be dependent on your organization.
Yeah, and we get a lot of people through the door with different ideas and different capabilities. So we've seen people from early startups who just need us to handle everything, all the way to people that already have a process and big teams that just need to staff augment. So the next thing that we wanted to discuss was cost, and how that kind of plays into both staff aug and outsourcing, which is basically with staff aug, you are paying for hours worked. So this is kind of like bringing someone into your company. You're essentially paying them for the work that they do. So specific work, you get to choose that. Obviously, that's a flexibility thing as well, but depending on the exact work that they're doing. So you're gonna, what you will avoid is some of the time savings around recruiting, training, retaining new employees. Now, later we'll talk a little bit about our model because we've solved some of those problems. So it doesn't mean everything in every situation, in every model is going to be exactly what we're outlining. This is basically just the majority of staff or the majority of outsourcing. A lot of those problems can be resolved. With outsourcing, you're probably going to pay higher fees. And the reason for that is, for example, we have a team in Bangalore, India, and that team requires a bench, right? Because we need to have, for specific projects, we need to make sure that we have a resource for that project that meets either the tech stack or whatever capabilities they need. And so if you're paying for our bench, you're obviously going to pay a premium for that and other things as well. And so, that's something to think about in terms of cost. Staff augmentation, you can go out and you can find the identical person that you're wanting, that you need, and that person comes at a lower cost. Or maybe you take on some of the QA if it's a technology project. There's things that you can do that will help with that cost. So with outsourcing, it's very much in a box. It has to be, there are certain costs that have to be covered, even though our costs in Bangalore are less versus the US. You still have some of those things to consider.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I'll kind of go right back to the same thing I was talking about before with control is that really relates to cost again is the means within your organization. If you've got the means to properly manage the resource that you're going to bring on, the cost will ultimately be lower if you go staff augmentation, right? If you can properly manage that person's time and give them tasks and make sure that they're staying productive and you're giving them the work that aligns along with their skill set, you're going to have a lot of those overhead costs from an outsourcing firm that they're going to have to put in, like Brandon was explaining. For you kind of have to in a way pay for their bench or pay for all of the management that goes on in the back end, right? Like their tech lead, their manager, their product owners, product managers, all of that kind of has to get bundled in when you're hiring like a development team. When you hire somebody directly for staff augmentation, you're just paying strictly for their time. So the costs go way, way down. But that only really works out for you if you're able to manage that person properly. So on the other side of it, right, is that if you don't know anything about software development, you do staff augmentation, you bring on a developer all by themselves, and you don't know how to give that person work or make sure that you're managing their performance, right? Like you don't know how much work needs to get done in an 8-hour day for a developer, and maybe they're only doing 3 hours worth of work, and you have no way of gauging that. Over time, that cost is going to catch up to you, even though you're paying less per hour. If those hours aren't sufficient or efficient, you're going to end up paying a lot more. The other thing that kind of goes into it is in a way is there's risk to it as well, right? Typically, when you outsource, if you're going to do it more project based, you can put things in the contract, right, for milestones or deliveries or deliverables, those types of things. So you can kind of, even though you may pay an inflated cost, you can have some guarantees and some insurances when you work, with a company to provide a product. Whereas with a resource, typically you can't really. And again, I know Brandon talked about different companies have different models. There's always kind of a gray area in there, but typically with staff augmentation, you're just going to pay for that employee's time. You can obviously put them on performance plans or fire them and get somebody else. But typically, it's going to be pretty rare you're going to find a staff augmentation model out there where, if they're not hitting their performance, you're not going to pay them, right? Like you have to pay them no matter what. You just have to hope that you have the means, in place to make sure that, they're being, their performance is meeting that criteria. So again, and I'll probably keep hitting this drum all the way through the end of this this webinar today, but it really just depends on the organization and your needs. Costs can be higher or lower, but typically if you have the tools within your house, within your organization, the cost is definitely be lower if you do staff augmentation.
Yeah, awesome. So next is flexibility, and I think the undisputed fact of this is staff augmentation is way more flexible. Maybe you could argue a couple points there, but I think when you look at flexibility in terms of adjusting the size and the skills, Those are really important because you can go out, like we mentioned before, directly, and you can find that individual that you want, right? You're going to meet those specific criteria. Adjusting the size of the team, I mean, that means that you could possibly have to fire somebody if that's not working out, but it's something that you can do and you have the ability to do, depending on your contract with them and whatever that looks like. You could terminate that contract. And the other thing is it doesn't necessarily affect your team. So you could have that as kind of an outside, they could work directly with your team, or they could work independent of your team, so that doesn't affect them as much. And then again, this was a point above, but also selecting, managing, evaluating, all of that type of stuff you have control over. And then also adapting to the changing needs. So, the size, skill, I mentioned that, and the project requirements and timeline. So those are things that are all flexible within that system. Outsourcing, on the other hand, again, is kind of in a box. So if you look at this, as a lot of people do fixed bid. We're a little bit different than that, but fixed bid basically says, here are the terms and conditions, here's what we're going to do, here's how long it could possibly take, and here's how many developers. You really don't have the ability to move in and out of that process, right? Or that model, I should say. And so you can't necessarily cancel the project per se. So in terms of flexibility, we definitely give it to staff augmentation. But again, if your point isn't to have flexibility and you really just, as maybe someone that doesn't know how to run a project like a startup, you really might need less flexibility and more control. So maybe flexibility isn't a good thing. It's actually counts against you.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I would say flexibility definitely, kind of goes to staff augmentation in the sense of, right, like once you hire that person, you bring them on, right, maybe you brought them on to work on a specific project, business needs change, things come up, you want them to work on a different project. You don't have to go back to that company and renegotiate contracts and do all these things. You can just say, hey, so-and-so, you're working on this today. Instead of, product A, we're moving you over to product B. You can really do whatever you need with that person's time. Whereas, again, with outsourcing, right, you're going to have to go back to that company and you're going to have to deal with all the contracts and then line all that out, and that could take a ton of time. But where I would say flexibility, does kind of cater a little bit more towards outsourcing. Again, depending on the situation, whether it's more of a fixed bid situation or maybe it's more of like a month-by-month type situation. Typically with an outsourcing company, if you're doing more of a month-by-month, you have a lot of flexibility to scale up the team or scale down the team within, maybe it's like a 30-day period or a 60-day period. Typically with staff augmentation, with what we do and what we've seen out there in the market a lot as well, is typically if you're going to hire through staff augmentation, and they're going to ask for a longer contract, right? It's going to be really, really difficult to go hire skilled workers to come in if there's no guarantee of some kind for like a longer contract, whether it be like 6 months or a year or 2 years. Obviously, there's going to be stipulations in there. If the person's not performing, they can be fired. But there needs to be some sort of guarantee to that employee that as long as they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're hitting those metrics, it doesn't really matter if there's business changes. They should still be guaranteed employment, unless it's a performance-based issue. So as far as, what you can do with the resources and the engagement, sometimes that can be more flexible in the outsourcing method of being able to switch people out or scale the team down. Whereas staff augmentation, typically you're locked into a little bit longer period. But what you can do with those resources on a day-to-day period, the flexibility is typically going to go towards the staff augmentation side.
Yeah. Awesome. So the final point that we have is really quality. And this one's interesting. I'd like to get into that a little bit more, but staff augmentation ensures higher quality. And there's a few reasons for that, but there's also some arguments against that as well. So we'll just say higher quality, direct monitoring and communication. So let's say that you have staff augmentation, you could actually integrate this into your internal processes. So if you have a specific way that you work, or your team works, or you have, specific software pieces or things like that, you can integrate that person into those and use those specifically. So that is going to facilitate that. It's going to make it easier for you, for your team, and they're essentially kind of following that whole culture, which can be advantageous. And so with outsourcing, again, if that's not the way that you're used to working, or it could frustrate that whole process. You're basically it poses some additional quality risks, right? I don't know if you want to get into that a little bit more, but you probably have where Colton works directly with this. The other thing I wanted to mention is we've kind of become a global economy, really. And there's I get a lot of questions around, or comments around, India or outsourcing or whatever, maybe quality is not better. And I get that question a lot. And I'm like, well, that it really doesn't, it's not inherent to the location geographically, or it's really the person, right? If that person has studied and they know that, they have experience, they know how to do it, then that's going to be better, right? Ultimately. So really, outsourcing is not inherently bad. It's just a lot of companies have done it wrong, or they've frustrated the process because people have gone through it. They've had a bad experience. And so now we've kind of opened up to the whole world. So you see a lot of countries that have come in with outsourcing potential. And there are some inherent roadblocks, but if you understand them and you can kind of overcome them, a lot of that quality goes away. And Colton can get into that because he does a lot of this stuff on a daily basis.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd say quality really ties into kind of the summary of all the points, which really comes down to, again, the organization. And really to summarize it, I would say, because it goes kind of along with all the points, is if your organization has the structure within its place to properly manage these types of resources, your quality is going to be better. You're going to have more flexibility. Your cost is going to be better, and your control is going to be better with going staff augmentation, right? If you can bring that person in to a team, like let's say, for example, you already have a development team, you've already got a Scrum team, right? So maybe you already have a product owner, you've got a Scrum master, you've got QA, you've got all those things in place, and maybe you need a specific skill set, or maybe you just need to, increase your number of developers from, 6 to 9, something like that. Staff augmentations can be ultimately the way to go, right? See, we've already got these measures in place for quality. You already have expectations set. You know what's realistic. You know what's not realistic. You know the velocity of your team. You already have these things in place, and so you can fit somebody in that. It's going to take some uptime, right, for them to get there, but they're going to be able to, fit into this team, and you're going to be able to set that quality, and you already have that level of expectation where it's going to work, pretty smooth. Obviously, depending on how structured it is within your organization, it should work pretty smooth. Now, as far as outsourcing goes, I think one of the biggest things that's always kind of a complexity is expectations, especially for people that aren't familiar with software development. Right, a lot of the time the applications we use have been built over the course of several years, many years, and they've spent millions of dollars on it, right? And they may have development teams of hundreds of developers, and QA specialists, and UX designers, and UI designers, and there's a million people that go into it, and that's the expectation we have set for software. And so when you bring on, an outsourcing team, you're really going to want to try to make it cheap and really push on budget, but also you kind of expect one of these applications that you see every day, right? Whether it be like Twitter or Google or something like that, right? Which typically when people are outsourcing, right, they're not spending, millions of dollars on an application. So the quality expectation, I think, is a really tricky one to hit with an outsourcing team. However, again, if you don't have the means to properly manage a team, If you just hire a bunch of staff, you just hire a bunch of developers and then you try to manage it yourself, you're not going to get the same kind of quality as if you go to an outsourcing team that has all of these people in place, have built several projects, know what they're doing. They're obviously going to have a better output, better quality than you would trying to manage them directly if you don't know what you're doing. So again, there's a lot of pros and cons depending on how your organization's set up. But really, here at Zibtek, right, we've kind of seen every end of the spectrum, right? Every different type of organization and what they need and what they don't need. What we found is really we've talked about these kind of two buckets, right, of people that are kind of opposite of each other, right? Maybe there's an organization that needs a project completed and they have no means of doing it themselves. They have no idea what it is, what goes into it. They just need a product built. The other end of the spectrum is there's an organization that's a well-oiled machine. They've got a team. They've got all the pieces. They just need to bring on some people to augment their team or build up their team. Those are really the opposite ends of the spectrum. Typically, what we've done in the past is we were more of a project-based service. We would come in with our team. We would kind of handle everything end to end. What we've started doing more recently is offering products to that other end of the spectrum where we can really augment the team and just get you those people that you need, right? We use our network in Bangalore with all of our HR specialists we have over there. We have all of our tech leads over there as well that allow us to figure out what your needs are, right, on like a technical aspect. We can do all the interviewing, all the screening, get you really, really good prices and get those people over to you. And then if you like that person, right, we can get them in the office and then we can manage that person at least on a day-to-day level, but then that person works directly for the client. So we feel like we have both kind of ends of the spectrum covered for these two different types of clientele. But I think where the really specific kind of special need and value comes in is that gray area in between. And we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but we talk about, those two different ends of the spectrum, but there's a lot of people that fit right in the middle of it. For example, we have a client that we've worked with where they have a product owner over there, really knows the product inside and out, knows how to do designs, right? So they've got someone over there that has all of that knowledge of exactly, what their business need is. They know exactly how they want the UX to work. They've got all the designs. So they've got that piece nailed. Now they need a development team, right? And so we've actually got kind of a hybrid method with them where we've been able to hire specifically developers for them to be long-term employees for them. But then we've been able to bring in people that we already have in-house as like a scrum master and a tech lead to help manage those development resources. Because the client has the means to be able to provide all of the instruction on what needs to be built, when it needs to be built, and how it needs to be built. But as far as day-to-day, making sure the code is up to par and is of quality, and making sure they're following best practices, he does not have the means to do that, right? So we've been able to augment and like on an hourly basis, like a scrum master to manage that day-to-day process, and then a tech lead to manage the quality of the code. We have another use case where we have a client that has a development team, and they wanted to move into like a couple new avenues. They had a web team, they had a tech lead, they had all those things, but they wanted to start building out the mobile application version of it. They've never done mobile. They really don't know what goes into it. And they've even had a hard time even trying to hire somebody for mobile because they don't really know what kind of skills. Even though they have a development team, they're still having an issue of like, well, how do I know that this person I'm going to hire for the mobile team is gonna work out? So that's something that we've been able to help them screen and hire a mobile developer to come onto their team. And that's all they needed, right? They just needed they needed the help onboarding that person and screening that person. But now that that person's in, they just fall into the regular Scrum like sprint plan that they've already got set. So there's a million different use cases. I would say out of all of our use cases that we've worked through, even just in the most recent year or two, I would say probably about 50% of our projects fall into distinct staff augmentation buckets and project-based buckets. And then that other 50% really falls in kind of in between, where it's a mixture of, some managed from outsource, some workforce. And that's where I really feel like we provide a really good product and service and quality, and value to the market is think a lot of companies out there want to fit you into two buckets. You know, they either provide you the two buckets and they force you into one of them, or they only provide the one bucket, and then you're kind of forced to meet those needs. And that's really where we're trying to fill in those gaps is we figure out what your need is within your organization, and then we can augment that with these different types.
And what's really exciting about what we're doing right now is something that's kind of difficult to do, which is set up your own business in a place like Bangalore, right? To do that, it would take local resources and know-how and all kinds of different things in order to do that. We already have an office set up. So what we started doing a long time ago is if we needed accounting, or if we needed HR, or if we needed a sales team, we started hiring in Bangalore, and we would bring them into our office, and they did an amazing job. So we've got all of these great resources, and sometimes they cross over. So our accounting has helped us with reports and data for sales. And so it kind of got really exciting, and we realized we're really good at it. And so we thought, why not take that out to businesses and allow them to do that as well? So we're allowing companies to leverage our office in Bangalore by hiring any type of position, not just technology. So if you have an accountant and you just want them to crunch numbers and, you know, do a specific set of work and get that done, you know, a lot of times they can do that while you're sleeping, and then you wake up and it's ready to go. Or, you know, you could hire them on a night shift or something like that. So there's a lot of abilities, but what's really exciting is there's 1.4 billion people in India. And so there's countless resources. So anything that you need in your company, we can fill that role. They come to our office, they work on our computers. We essentially manage all of that. You just manage that resource. So you train them, you hire them, you train them, you do everything else. You know, we're just there to act as a place for them to work. So that's gotten really exciting lately.
Yeah, and I think, right, like we've got the infrastructure, right? We've got the office there, we've got the HR, we've got all those things to help get someone over there, handle all the taxes and all that stuff. You don't have to worry about, there's a lot that goes into it as far as like paying somebody in a different country. You know what I mean? So that's another thing that we handle is you're just paying a US entity. You're getting the outsourced cost and, you know, the overseas cost and benefits there, but you also don't have to deal with the headache of all that red tape that you have to deal with. But also the other thing that we've been able to help people a lot with is really like the onboarding, right? Like at the end of the day, if you do more of like a staff augmentation model, that is your employee in a way that you're going to work with directly. Mm-hmm. But we do understand that when you first start with somebody overseas, there's a lot of unknowns. Like, how do I set up a schedule? How do I manage somebody that's, you know, on the other side of the world? How do I go about those things? That's something we've done for years and years and years. So that's something that we don't just get you the resource and say good luck. You know, we can help you through those stages of really tips and tricks that we've worked out, because we have, like Brandon said, we have accounting, we have sales, we have devs, we have pretty much every facet of our organization is in some way managed overseas, and we've figured out how to manage those people and make sure that we have a really good overlap and have, you know, fill in those cracks, you know, with communication and everything. So when we bring on a client, we can really coach them and help them set up those processes to make sure that they have that really tight, you know, communication and connection with them. So yeah, it's you know, again, like I said, I know I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but it really depends on your organization and what you need. But the beauty is we kind of see ourselves as we're that door, that gateway that lets you access this whole network of people over in Bangalore that are very highly trained, highly skilled at a fraction of the cost of a US employee, and we can really help you, guide you through that process and get you the resource that you need, no matter what your organization setup is exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. Well, I think that's we're kind of at the end here.
We're actually over today. So.
Yeah. With our technical glitch, that might even out. Anyway, appreciate everybody being here, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And I guess we'll sign out from the flannel beard crew.
Yeah, we're out of here. Thank you.